Well, hey, everybody, it's Casey J. Cox with the Quarterback Dadcast. We're in season 5, getting to the tail end of season 5. And I'm very excited for our next guest. He's someone I got introduced to by a former podcast, Quarterback Dadcast, esteemed guest, the one and only Mark Nussbaum, the talented Mark Nussbaum. And he called me one day. He says, J. Cox, I got a guy you got to meet. And we went back and forth. We talked forever. And his name is Larry Thompson. He's a staffing veteran. He's a Georgia Bulldog. Um, but that's not why we're having him on, everybody. We're having him on because we're going to talk to Larry the dad. We're going to hear how he's worked hard or continues to work hard to become that ultimate quarterback or leader of his household. So without further ado, Mr. Thompson, welcome to the Quarterback Dadcast.
Awesome. Thank you, Casey. Happy to be
Awesome.
here.
Well, we always start out each episode with gratitude. So tell me, what are you most grateful for as a dad today?
Oh, wow. It's a great question too, because there's so many things I'm grateful for. I think probably the one thing I'm most grateful for is that I have one daughter, and raising a daughter was I was not prepared for that at all. Um,
No
what I'm
manual.
probably most grateful for though is that as she's gotten older and I've gotten older, we both kind of I think grown into it. Is how close we are. And the scary part, my wife reminds me she's a lot like me. So that's, and just becoming really good friends, close friends with my daughter has been probably the thing I'm most grateful for.
That's awesome. Well, I have a daughter, I have a son and a daughter, but with both children, as you know, Larry, they don't give us a manual and a step by
True.
step, which it would have been great if I had that, but I don't.
Yep.
I'd say what I'm most grateful for today. I had a word. I'm actually going to post about this later on LinkedIn because I always like to post when I'm inspired by something. And today I was inspired by a client who is in the Tampa area, and I'm grateful for the conversation I had with my daughter before she went to school. I said, "Hey, Rye," I said, "You know what the word perspective means?" She goes, "Yeah." I go, "Maybe she was too sleepy." So I go, "You know where Tampa is?" She's like, "I go, Riley, it's Florida." "Oh yeah, oh yeah, yeah. Sorry, Dad." And we kind of laughed, joked about that. I go, "Do you know why I'm so grateful for perspective today?" And she's like, "Why?" I go, "Because my client just said, hey, Casey, we gotta, if it's okay, can we move our training you're doing with our team on Wednesday for a few weeks out because we have a huge storm about to hit us and we have to do storm prep for our houses." And it was just to stop me in my tracks and made me think like, man, we are freaking fortunate. I live in Seattle and we have risk of earthquakes and we get windstorms in the fall and winter, but like we don't get hurricanes. And I just can't even imagine. And I know that people are still struggling for the first one that hit them a couple weeks ago. And then they got stuff on their lawns and it's like, it could be freaking disastrous. And so I'm just
Yep.
grateful for our situation in Seattle and health wise right now, but I'm also grateful just for the time that I was able to kind of be present and slow down with my daughter Riley and just kind of have a good conversation before she went to school. And yeah, you don't know what that does, but hopefully it kind of gets her mind going the right ways.
You know, so and Casey, you're spot on with that. I think it is perspective. It's funny because we had funny is not the right choice of words, but um, we lived in my wife and I and my daughter lived in Western North Carolina for a big chunk of our early married life, and so we still have a lot of friends and we still have family there and so forth. And so we've kind of seen that with the storm that's gone through. And we actually had a call this morning in the company. We call it a business continuity plan. And whenever there's a storm that hits, particularly in our offices in Florida and so forth, we get together and talk about, okay, how are we going to approach this? How are we going to make sure everybody stays safe? And it was the same thing. I've got two people on my team that are new dads. Okay, literally within the last 4 months. And we have a meeting scheduled in our headquarters in McLean later this week. And they're asking me, so, okay, are we still on? I said, yeah, but you know what? I'm going to tell you, you should stay home. I said, you need to take care of your family to make sure that, you're there with them. Because I can't, that to me is like, all the other stuff is unimportant. You got a storm coming in, you got anything that's impacting you, it's like, you got to be there with them.
Yeah.
And, it does. It forces you, I think, to look at things in a little bit bigger picture too.
Yeah, it does. It's like, whether it's health. I mean, I do a gratitude journal every morning, Larry, and one of the two lines I'd say at the same I've been doing this for 5 years now. And every time I write this down, it gives me a little smile. Like it just subconsciously happens. And everybody says like, God, thanks for waking me up today. And I say, I'm grateful for my health. I'm I'm grateful I woke up today and I got a chance to do something great today.
Yeah.
Something as corny as that, but it just gets my mind going the right way.
It makes a huge difference. It makes a huge difference because it's easy. I think, we're humans. Okay. It's easy to pull the stress from yesterday into
Hmm.
each day and kind of keep. I actually was reading something not long ago that basically said all anxiety and fear either comes from what hasn't happened that you think might, or what has happened that you can do nothing about. And
1,000%. I totally agree with that.
and 90% of the things we worry about and stress over actually never do happen. But in the meantime, we've lost that joy because we're focusing on that. So
So true. So true. All these things we can relate back and tie back to fatherhood in a hurry, because it's always like dads. Part of this today's conversation, we're going to learn a lot about Larry, but we're also going to, hopefully you're going to take away some actionable ways you can be thinking about, be that better leader of your home, better leader just yourself, better, craft the right mindset to enter your home after a rough day of work or after whatever it may be. But um, we're going to, later in the conversation, Larry, I want to learn all about your role at Dices and we make sure that we can send people, if they've never heard of your company, we're going to make sure they know about it today. But before that, bring me inside the Thompson huddle. You said you got a daughter, but tell me a little bit about her. And then I'd love to hear how you and your wife met.
so my daughter is actually she's coming up. Hang on, to think about this. Yeah, she's coming up on 32 years old this next week,
Sweet.
and she's actually coming to visit. She lives just outside of Raleigh. Amazing kid. She actually, I will say, interesting. You talk about having a manual for raising children, and I could have definitely used one because those early years, I mean, inseparable. All right. I was not prepared for the teenage years at all. And it's funny because I remember when she was born, my brother-in-law, who had three kids, told me, said, "Hey, the good news is it doesn't happen overnight. You got time to prepare." No, I was not prepared. And yet that circle back around, like I said, has been just an amazing journey. So um, just a huge heart on her, just a great person, and probably one of the most thoughtful, caring people that I've known, in a lot of ways, and incredibly empathetic to where she kind of really connects with everybody. Yeah, it's been fun to watch. I wish I could say I had some input on that. I probably had none. I think it was my wife probably that imparted a lot of that. But um, yeah, so as far as how my wife and I met, it's really interesting. We met as sophomores. It's kind of a funny story that does not paint a good picture of me, but I'm going to tell the story anyway. Um, we were um, we were both going to a junior college in north of Atlanta, and I was actually really good friends with her boyfriend at the time, who was a year older than both of us. And he actually was head of the student government in our junior college, and I had never been interested in any kind of student government function, whatever. And he talked me into joining that student government, running for the election and so forth, and I was elected to it. As he was getting ready to leave to go to Georgia, a year ahead of me, he pulled me aside and goes, "Hey," he said, "I'm a little worried. I said, you just kind of keep an eye on Terry and make sure she's okay." She's like, just sit with her, have lunch with her, you know, so forth. And my story is that I've been doing that for almost 40 years now. So um, we met first as friends and literally just like I said, we just started kind of having lunch together, hanging out a little bit at school, and talking, and enjoyed each other's company. Dated for dated for 2 years, and then got engaged, and were engaged for another 2 years, and got married. So in May of next year will be our 40th anniversary.
Wow.
And
Congrats.
I've said this as a joke before. It's like, I'm still, I'm watching out for her. He's never come back for her, so I guess I'm good now. So, um, but
Well, hopefully he won't listen today.
yeah, hopefully not. Hopefully not. I mean, he's a great guy, and he was a good friend, and I felt a little bit guilty about it, but
It
you
is
know,
meant to be.
those things just happen, and it was meant to be. So, um, yeah, and so we've known each other for a very long time. Her family was from North Carolina. She was born and raised in North Carolina. We met in Georgia. I wound up leaving the junior college, went to the University of Georgia. She went to an all-women's school called Brenau College, which is Brenau University now. And Wound up back in North Carolina, as happens a lot of times when you marry a girl from North Carolina. And yeah, and now settled in Southern Virginia, sort of that western tip in the mountains in Virginia right now.
Very cool. Sounds awesome. Well, one question that's always fun for me to learn about my guests is to ask when I ask them to go back in time and talk about the impact that your mom and dad had on you, and what was life like growing up, and what were some key things that you took from your childhood that you used, when you were raising your daughter.
Um, wow, this is the part that I'm gonna ask forgiveness up front because I might get a little emotional about this. My parents were pretty amazing. Actually, both of them came out of a little farm town in northwestern Missouri. High school educated. My dad worked in a factory his pretty much his whole life. Worked his way up through the organization. I always said that he had an engineer's mind, but without the degree.
Hmm.
One of the most talented guys I've ever known when it came to working with machinery um, and still to this day, it's like if I'm having trouble starting a lawnmower or starting something, it's like I want to pick up the phone and call him, and it's like unfortunately he's no longer here, but um, just an amazing work ethic. And they both, like I said, my mom was from a large family, um, difficult childhood. Basically, they grew up that latter part, after the Depression, but still in a farm community. My grandfather, her dad, was they called him a tenant farmer, but typically it's another word for a sharecropper. He was hired help on a farm, and it was my gosh, I think she was 12 years old, maybe 11 years old before they actually lived in a house that had like wooden floors.
Wow.
Very, very poor. And when she was about 12 or 13, he just decided he'd had enough of being a dad and husband and left. And left my grandmother to raise, well, two of them were old enough to kind of take care of themselves, but raised four kids. This was, so she was very focused on her family, very focused on raising me and my brother. Um, Incredibly resilient woman. The I guess the impact, I guess probably the life lesson I learned most of all from her. So when and I'll shorten this, abbreviate it a little bit, unless you'd like me to go into more detail. But when I was about 6 years old, I contracted a virus that turned into viral encephalitis and was hospitalized, actually in a coma for almost a week and a half, 2 weeks.
You say a
Came
coma?
out of it and paralyzed over three-quarters of my body, and couldn't walk, couldn't raise my left arm. Literally, she would tell the story. She goes, it used to kind of creep her out a little bit because I couldn't close that left eye, so I would sleep with one eye open. And at the time, the neurologists and the doctors pretty much said this is as good as it's going to get. It's never going to recover from this. And this was back in the mid 60s, late 60s, I guess, and said your best option for him is to put him in a home, okay, an institution. Um, and my mom, who was again high school educated, grew up on a farm, sitting in a room with, and my dad told this story, but sitting in a room with three other neurologists and very, very, I guess, learned doctors, and she pretty much called BS on them. And she said, "No, I don't think you're right." And she goes, "I'm not putting him there, and we'll see what happens." And she basically became my physical therapist. And over the course of the next several months, started regaining some function, blinked my eyes, started able to move my fingers, my toes. And within less than 9 months, we walked back into the doctor's office, the neurosurgeon's office. And when I mean walked back into it, and they literally were shocked. So, if you look at the things that shape your life, there was that never give up kind of mindset, never accept things at face value sort of thing, and and fight through. So um, both of them, literally, that was sign of the mindset. For both of them, both for me growing up. The the work ethic really, and the hard work, the effort, those sort of things probably have more of an impact on me than anything else. So Um, Now I'm gonna I guess enlarge that circle just a little bit, if you will. Um, Beyond that, after having recovered and so forth, it was probably as idyllic a childhood as you can imagine. Okay, especially in that little farm town, everybody knew you. Everybody knew who you were. They knew whose kid you were. Um, and I love telling this story because I think it paints a picture of this little town. It's a farm town of maybe 300 people. At its peak, it was 300 people. And my grandfather used to race horses, and I love horses. So basically, whenever we would go visit, which was just about either every weekend or during the summer, we'd be there for several weeks. He'd have a horse saddled up for me, and you know, at 7 years old, I've got my cowboy boots and my cap pistols on, and I hop on that horse, and I just rode. And the town was so small that if I got hungry, I could ride up to someone's house and knock on the door, and they would feed me lunch, and I just keep going.
On your
Um,
horse?
and the interesting thing, it was an eye opener for me in what shapes you sometimes. Is probably 5 or 6 years ago, I had gone back to funeral for my uncle, who was my mom's youngest brother and almost more of a big brother to me than an uncle. And the turnout was incredible. But what shocked me was how many people, and I hadn't even been back to visit that town in a long time. Okay. But how many people knew me as a kid, remembered me, remembered my parents. It was a feeling of home that you just don't experience very often. And I wound up doing the eulogy for my uncle, at the time it shocked me because when I got up there and didn't realize I was going to say this, and it's like, they talk about the comment, it takes a village, and you don't realize who and what necessarily shapes you until you have an experience like that. And that's, I think, probably had between what my parents did and what this community did for me at that time, shaped who I am as a man, who I wanted to be as a man, kind
Wow. Okay, there's a lot to unpack there, man. So
of thing.
I gotta get the visual. So did I hear you right? You would ride a horse at 7 years old and just roll up to your people's houses and just like,
Yeah,
hey, can I get a PB and J?
they all knew me. Yeah, exactly. They all knew me and said, "Hey, it's wanted to stop by and say hi." I would be one of those kids who was like, "Something smells good in there. What's for lunch?" And come on in, have a seat. And it was everybody knew. I'm sure there was probably a little phone network that went on where they were calling my grandmother, saying, "Hey, Larry's over here. He's having lunch with us." But as far as I knew, it's like wherever I wanted to stop, they were, come on in.
That
Tiger,
is,
literally, they would say, okay, because we're a farm community. So it's like, yeah, tie your horse over by the barn, come on in, have lunch. And I felt like a 7-year-old cowboy.
I was
But
gonna
if
say,
you,
I might
and
start calling you White Herb.
I was, and if you think about it, a year earlier,
Wow.
I couldn't even walk, you know? And yeah, it was a pretty amazing childhood, to be honest with you.
Okay, so you get this virus, and the thing that really hit me in the heart when you're telling that story is be your own advocate, health wise. And God, shout out to all the doctors, you guys are amazing. But I think personal opinion, sometimes our health system is broken in many ways, but like it's you got to keep them on a schedule and in and out and in and out. And sometimes like the really good doctors out there are super curious, which I think all of us salespeople, the good ones are curious, the good leaders are curious. But sometimes that story also proves I know that moms and women, they have this secret superpower called a mom's intuition that you do not mess with.
Agreed.
They're always right with that type of stuff. And like she deep down she knew. And what a fantastic, just belief that no, we ain't going out like this. And I mean, I'd be willing to bet there's times later in your life, maybe as a dad or a business person, have you ever found you reflect back on that moment of what your mom went through and
Oh,
that
oh,
you like to
absolutely.
rely on for strength?
There were, yes, yeah, there were a couple of things. I remember when my daughter, because it kind of evolved or morphed from chicken pox, okay, which is normal. I mean, almost every child has chicken pox, okay, and it was just a few. a fluke thing that happened, and there were a handful that it happened to in that area about that time frame. But I remember when my daughter got chickenpox, I was terrified.
Mm.
Okay, absolutely terrified. Okay, and lived through that. I think the other piece of it too, it was those lessons that I've learned. Yeah, tried to help my daughter fight through certain things that were tougher. Now there's a balance there too. Okay, is understanding that again. This was learning to raise a daughter. Okay, is that there's emotions that play into that you don't always take into consideration. You can't just rub dirt on it and get back in the game. You can't just fight through certain things, and having to balance that out. Um, but there's also that message that I tried to impart. It's like, yeah, you know what? Pretty much, if you put your mind to it and persevere, there's not much you can't accomplish.
So
And
true.
overcome.
The mind is one of the most undervalued superpowers and tools we have. And the words I always talk to my kids often about, the words you say matter. What we put into
Mhm.
your mind, majority of the things we do are in our subconscious without even knowing it.
Yep.
But when and the power, I've done studies around the words "I will."
Hmm.
Just saying "I will" or writing "I will" down, that's powerful. That can impact how we show up, whether it's in work, at home. Like, I will be on time, or I will be patient. I will be
Right.
a better listener. And when you put that in your brain, weird, I start listening better. And there's studies about it that show. So it's like, I love that you said that. But when you're saying that, you also made me think about empathy, Larry. I think sometimes when we go through these moments of adversity or tribulation, like, it's easy sometimes to say, well, hey, I made it through this. Why can't you get through that? So maybe, as other dads out there raising daughters, maybe they haven't quite connected with the daughter yet. I know sometimes it's, I get my daughter in the morning when she's really tired, and I sometimes get at the end of the day when she's really tired. So I always struggle with, like, just trying to, like, meet her where she's at, when she's ready to talk or open up, like, be there. But I'm hoping that I get experience with you experience, which is that, later in life, she comes back around and, like, Dad, I remember all the time you used to rebound for me and all these stories. But talk about empathy, back when your daughter was growing up.
Um, I don't know that. I think when she was younger, I think it was there because I could relate a lot to that when I mentioned the teenage years. Okay, I'm not sure that my empathy factor was really good, as I wasn't raised around girls. I mean, it was me
Yeah.
and my brother. Okay, even my mom was more of a tomboy, being raised with four brothers, and so I didn't really experience that side of it, and so. I don't know that I was incredibly empathetic when she was going through that, and I think, and we've talked about that afterwards. I think there's some things that I'm incredibly proud of her, but I think there's some things I look back and I definitely could have done it better, and definitely could have handled better. And had I been a little bit more empathetic in that regard, um, yeah, I would have. I would have. I would have. That's one of those where I wouldn't mind having a do over in some things. Now, as she's gotten older, and like I said, I've probably gotten a little bit. I hope, hopefully, a little bit wiser. Is starting to understand that while she's a lot like me in a lot of ways, she's also not like me in a lot of ways, and understanding that side of it, and really kind of letting her be her own person. I think that was probably a little bit of a challenge for me. You see somebody that looks like you and thinks like you, and to a certain extent, and has a lot of similar characteristics. You want them to follow a similar path. And what I realized is her path's very unique to her, and in a lot of ways, probably better and healthier than my path was. And kind of letting them. I think it's funny because I thought about this the other day, Casey. What is that raising a child? What is that one of the biggest challenges? And it's for me, it was allowing them to learn from their own mistakes. Okay.
Hard to
You,
do.
it is, and you kind of want to protect them. You want to kind of make, hopefully they avoid some of the missteps and the screw ups that you had, and you want to save them from that. When in reality, we probably learn, at least I do. I learn a lot more from my failures than I learn from my successes. And
You
so,
do. I mean,
you know,
I think we have a culture where, the phrase, helicopter parent or snowplow parent, but if our
right,
kids don't go through that adversity, um, it's hard. I mean, shoot, I'm not perfect at that. There's been times but I think as my kids are getting older, I find me, my wife and I were talked about, I have a son in college. I'm like, we, we can't do that anymore. He's got to go do it, or we can't do this, but like, I think listen, you can listen, you can ask questions, but they got to be the one to rescue themselves. And if
right.
you keep,
And
being,
that's a terrifying feeling too. That
oh,
first, when they're no longer. It's one thing even when they're in high school and they may be gone for a week or they may be gone for a couple of days. You kind of know exactly where they are and what they're doing. And then that transition to college when they could be hours away, in some cases, entire country away, and they're also being independent, so they may not call you when you want to, and you may not call you back when you call them, and all the little things like this, and you're going, I can't protect them any longer. And it's a
mhm.
terrifying, or at least it was for me, sort of a terrifying thing that it's like my job as a parent is to keep her safe, but you know, um,
Yeah.
it's an
Well,
adjustment.
yeah, 100. Well, and I wish people told me. I mean, I think they did. I just probably didn't hear them. I mean, I take
Yeah.
that back. I heard them. I didn't listen to them because I didn't. It didn't. I wasn't ready to go through it. But like when my son left for college, that first week was brutal. We
Mhm.
were so sad, and we're back to normal. We miss him. We wish he was here, but like he's thriving. He's having a great
Yep.
time, and it's just that you know you go from 4 to 3, and
Yep.
you guys went from 1 to 0. I
Yeah, we
mean,
did. It
you
was
know,
a big adjustment. It was, there's a certain amount of, it's like, okay, we got this. We can do this. It's funny. I remember when we did the campus visit, my wife and I were both like, man, can we just kind of go back to school? This looks awesome. But then you drive away, and yeah, the first thing was, and like I said, fortunately, my wife's been my best friend since the very beginning, but all of a sudden, okay, what do we talk about?
right?
And it took a while to kind of get used to that again, and enjoy that. So
Yeah, it's important. You got to learn to date again, almost.
it really was, and it's interesting, and it's very funny because like I said, my daughter's 32 years old now, and we'll do a trip somewhere, and cause we'll tell us like, hey, we're getting ready to go here and so forth. And she goes, well, thanks for inviting me. And it's like, okay, you're 32, you do your own trips now, okay?
Right.
We'll do a family trip, that's different, but it's still there's that bonding expectation there.
So I want to go back and feel free to share what you're comfortable sharing. But like one of the questions I always like to ask dads is like an area of your dad game that maybe wasn't the best, or right, or an area where you wish, God, you mentioned you could have a do over. I got stories for days on that, but like I think one theme for me that I always think about, that I'm working hard to just find ways to get better each and every day, is my patience. And so as a
Mm-hmm.
competitive dude, I think this podcast, I've interviewed over 270 dads going on 5 years now, which is almost 6, which is crazy to think. But I've definitely seen my patience improve just because I'm talking about it so often.
Right.
For you, Larry, maybe think back to a time when you're raising your daughter and you're like, God, I was not my best. Like that you might feel comfortable sharing, that might hit a dad at home listening, that might help him from making that same mistake that either you did or I did.
Yeah, there's probably a lot of those where I wish I had better patience. Um, I think probably two that popped to mind when my daughter was in high school and started dating. No dad ever thinks that the guy they're dating is good enough. All right, and and I think I probably could have been a lot more understanding and a lot more patient. That it's a process, and it's like they've got to learn, they've got to make the same mistakes that we did as kids, and understanding that, and was probably overprotective. Okay. And so I know it doesn't answer the patient's question, but in a sense, if I had the patience to trust her and do that, I think it probably would have been a better, different outcome. I think the other thing too is, you know, is going through the college years and the process and understanding again, thinking I was one of those people that literally when I got into school, it's like, okay, how quickly can I get out? All right, how quickly can I finish up, get my degree, get started making a living, earning money, that sort of thing. Her process was very different. Okay, and so that where I got very frustrated was not having the patience that say, you know what, it is a journey sometimes, and not just the destination. And again, I look back on my, particularly, I mean, really, even the 2 years that I was at the junior college and 2 years I was at Georgia, I wished I had taken the time to enjoy it more. Okay, because there's so many pieces about that shape who you are and shape how you deal with people and how you communicate and how and to me it was always the destination. We still actually joke about that when my daughter and I hike together. Okay, she actually, we love doing it, but we also hate it at the same time because we are two very different hikers. She is the one that takes her time and she'll wander off the path and she'll look at this and she'll look at that and she really gets into the moment and she enjoys it. I have a tendency to look at it more like it's exercise and I'm got to get the finish line. And so I'm usually anywhere from 20 to 100 yards ahead of her going, will you hurry up? And she's like, Dad, just take your time, enjoy it. So there are some things I'm obviously still working on to
Yep.
kind of have those patience. And I'm not, and honestly, logically, I know her route is better. I know her method is much better and much healthier than mine. But
Probably allowed you to be more present in her path.
exactly, so
You know, the old John wouldn't be quick, but don't hurry.
right,
You
exactly,
know,
great, yeah.
I love. There's so many John Woodenisms out there, but um, okay. So the resiliency you had growing up, the grit, the horse skills. Like you could have been the next Kentucky Derby winner, but you weren't. You decided to join Dices.
I was more of the John Wayne cowboy type than I was the horse racer. So
Okay.
that was what I. It's very funny. We've done this as with the team. I think I mentioned this to you before. Is it's interesting. I have one daughter, but I feel like I have about 50 kids. Okay,
Sure.
with what we do, and we've talked about the stories of growing up and so forth. And I remember we went around and we asked everybody, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" And it came back to me, and I was like, "Oh, it's the same as it was when I was 7 years old. I still want to be a cowboy." Okay, it's pretty unlikely that's going to happen now, but yeah, that whole concept of that was more my goal there when I was 7 years old.
Well, if it helps you, Larry, for the rest of the week, I'm gonna have when I think of Larry Thompson, I'm gonna see the visual of you riding a freaking massive black stallion just around the
I appreciate
Virginia
that.
mountains. Um, okay, as you think about the themes that what you took from your childhood, you obviously I'm jealous of your pops. He was a super handy dude. He sounds a lot like my father-in-law. Shout out to Bruce Level. My father-in-law is the dude who can fix anything. My dad, God love him, rest in peace, was not the most handiest dude. Pretty handy. Actually, I am. If you Google worst handiest man in the United States history and then click images, like my face will show up.
There
I can type, I can talk, I just
you
can't
go.
fix things.
We all have our skills, right?
Oh
It's it,
man,
it's very funny. My dad was that guy, but he was always the mechanical guy. For whatever reason, I got into woodworking when I was in high school, and that's my thing. But it's interesting. There's a lineage there. My grandfather and my great grandfather were both carpenters. And so my dad could fix anything. There's not many things I can't build, but I'm fixing them. It's a whole different story for me. If it's mechanical, I'm still phoning a friend for help on that one. So
okay, good. You're one of me then. um, but as you reflect back, like when you were raising your daughter, that maybe dads can take from our conversation today on um, key themes or key values, maybe to talk about what were the values that were you and your wife talked about that were really, really important for your daughter to learn early, that, and maybe if there's a story or two that comes to mind of how you really reinforce those.
Oh, the thing is, it's like, as far as core values, I think it's always been um, integrity, character, trust, those sort of things. Those have always been the things. I remember as little, when she was very little, and I know she got so sick of me saying this over and over again, but you know, it would be the thing, if I can't trust you on the little things, I can never trust you on the big things. Okay. And it's the little things that would make a difference. And I know that was the thing that we said over and over again. Um, and I know that that's one of those that in seeing her as an adult now, she has an incredibly high bar for integrity. Okay. And to the point where I've actually, we've had that conversation about balancing that with a little bit of empathy, that somebody will actually do something that violates that in her mind, and she'll write them off. It's like, I can't trust that person anymore. It's like, okay, think about the consequence. Think about the situation. Is there, not to offset it, but are there extenuating circumstances you may not be aware of? And I think that was a lot of what we focused on, I guess, as a kid, is really just, you know, I used to say this often, and I think still honestly believe this, is that we should not need written contracts. Okay. Your word is your bond. Okay. Little old school, but basically it's like, if you say you're going to do something, do it. Okay. And live by that. And we've had several conversations on that, where things the same, like anybody. All right. Where she said she was going to do something, didn't do it. And we would sit down, we'd talk about it. It's like, okay, so what's the outcome of that? Okay. Do you feel good about that conversation, that decision? All right. And ultimately it comes back to those, where is your moral compass really, more than anything else, and what drives you? And if it's integrity, if it's trust, if it's honesty, I think, at least in my view, if you stand for those three things, everything else is going to take care of itself.
Well, you hit a chord with me, my man, because I 1,000% agree with you. And that 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 lesson you learned from your family that you now pass down. I mean, probably why you've been successful in business and sales and leadership, but because just like you tell your customer you're going to do something, then do it. If you tell your teammate you're going to do something, you're going to do it. If you tell your employee you're going to do something, then do it. And if you are someone that doesn't follow through on the expectations you set, then wow, your trust is eroded, your relationships fail. And in the state of this AI that we're living right now, and I think AI, what I love, it helps really, really smart people be better, but I also think it helps the lazy get worse.
100%.
And I'm not going to name the AI company, but I was at a conference speaking recently, and I went up to the AI company, big one, and I said, "Hey, tell me how you think this is going to impact salespeople?" And because I got some thoughts, and then he said some stuff, and I said, I think it's going to freaking make the shittiest, pardon my French, shitty salesperson worse, because he or she ain't going to be able to back up anything they're talking about. They have no stories to back up, and so I know I'm kind of taking conversation a little different route here, but I think I love that those are little things that are going to be timeless until like we get wiped off the earth, and there's no reason for humans to talk. The stuff you taught your daughter is always going to be important.
Sure. Well, I hope so. I think if we lose those things and they're no longer important, I'm hoping I'm gone by then.
Yeah,
Okay.
me too.
But it's interesting your observation on the AI, because I tend to agree with that. I think the thing that probably worries me the most about that, I think it's got some amazing applications. I think there's going to be some great growth, but it's like anything else that, if something is created for good, it can also have negative effects. I worry that it's going to hamper creativity. Okay. You've had a very successful sales career, and a lot of that, and what makes you successful, is the ability to think outside the box sometimes. Okay. It's how you actually deliver a solution or how you support a client or how you work with somebody is sometimes you have to be creative. And I kind of compare it to how we are. Used to be, we grew up having maps. Like we fold out maps that you could never fold back together. And you inherently either remembered how to get from point A to point B or you used a map. I swore when GPSs came out, I was never going to use them because it was going to dumb me down. And I use them all the time now. And the crazy thing is, yes, I probably could still read a map, but it's made me lazy in remembering how to get from point A to point B. And it's a very simple explanation or example, but I worry about that, the use of AI, that we rely on something to take away that creative part of our brain, I guess.
Yeah, you still have to have critical thinking skills. I think for me, like if I use it now and I teach my kids this, I'll say, take the first stab, or hey, here, write me an outline for this, but then make it your voice. Because if it's not your voice, people are going to know it's not the same. Um, I mean, one man's opinion, and now and we joked before we started recording, we're going to sound old here in a second, but I think there's so much. But also to that point too, it's funny. My kids can't even believe this happened. So when I first got my license, I remember like, oh, I can drive myself to the golf course with my buddies, and we'd call a golf course to your map example, and I'd say, okay, well, we live in Fairwood. Where is your golf course? Oh, it's over in Auburn. Okay, well, how do I get there? Is there anybody that can give me directions that works there? And they would literally, okay, yep, take this road, turn left.
Yep.
And I'm like writing down. I'm like, I can't imagine like how scary that would have been for one, the distraction as a driver back then. And we worry
Yep.
about kids being distracted now with devices and all these things. But like I was distracted as it all could be. Handwritten notes trying to figure out how to get to the golf course. What the hell?
Exactly. Exactly.
Um, okay, so you grew up resilient, gritty. You have amazing mom, amazing dad. I love the stories you've shared. How does one from riding horses get into staffing? What in the hell? How'd that happen?
I have no idea. And that's the crazy thing, Casey. It wasn't a direct line. A lot of people's careers is a straight line from point A to point B. Mine was literally like a country road in West Virginia. It was all over the place. I actually came out of school with an MIS degree, which at that point in time was a combination of computer science and business. And oddly enough, I thought I was going to be a programmer. I thought I was going to develop code, and I did an internship writing, of all things. This was really making me sound old. Writing COBOL code so many years ago, and at the end of the internship, the person I was, and I thought that was what I was going to do. I thought that was going to be my career. And the interesting thing was, I didn't enjoy it, but I didn't realize necessarily that I didn't enjoy it. I thought it was just, okay, this is what I'm going to have to do. Did the internship. At the end of the internship, my supervisor, my boss at the internship, took me to lunch. Walking out, he puts his hand on my shoulder. Said, "Larry, said, listen, really loved having you here. Team really likes you. Great guy." He goes, "But I got to be honest with you." He goes, "Son, your code really sucks." He goes, "Have you ever thought about a different career?" And I was devastated
Uh,
because I'm going, "What the hell am I going to do now?" And I remember talking to an advisor, and he said, at that point in time, he goes, "Listen," he said, your only other option is to go into sales." And this was at a time, again, you got to remember, my dad started off as an assembly line. He worked his way up. It was like, sales was not a career you aspired to at that point, at least in his mind. It was something that other people did. And so I remember having to tell him, it's like, look, I think this is the path I'm going to go. And to his credit, he goes, "Well, you think you can make a living at it?" And I said, "Yeah, I think I can. Just do it." So went into the industry selling computer hardware, like large mainframe systems. Like, we were a competitor to IBM. As a company called Digital Equipment Corporation, which has long since disappeared. But we were number two computer manufacturer in the world at the time, and ultimately hired by one of my clients to manage their sales force. Interesting story too, because I was 27 years old, thought I knew everything about leading a team. It was the most magnificent crash and burn in leadership you've ever seen in your life. It was just a disaster. And I learn from our failures, not from our successes. I learned more from that there. Um, Ultimately wound up out of work. My wife we just found out that she was pregnant and was in a panic. And through some networking, I had a friend that said, "Hey, we've got, got a need for a guy in the staffing company." And at the time, I literally, Casey, I thought I was like, "Oh my God, this is how far my career has fallen." Okay. And what I found was I loved it. Okay. Once I was able to check my ego and really say, hey, you know what, this is actually a pretty exciting and a pretty rewarding job. And I actually did that for quite a while. I was in staffing for several years. Went through an acquisition of the company that I was in. Was asked to stay and help with the transition, and didn't particularly care for that company and how they did things. And again, it was an integrity thing for me. And so I left the industry for almost 15 years. Went to work, actually bought a business with a buddy of mine and turned it around, sold it a few years later, and did nonprofit work for about 7 years and loved it. Absolutely loved it. And I actually thought that was going to be my path is basically the fundraising, the public outreach, the public relations piece of nonprofit work. And a really good recruiter from Dices called me and said, "Hey, would you be interested in coming back to staffing?" And when I stopped laughing hysterically, it's like, why would I want to do that? She goes, "Well, we'd like for you to meet some folks and see what you think." And walking in the door, talking to the team, it was like, I kind of missed this. And that's how I got back into staffing. And this was probably 10 years ago. Was with Dices for about 3 years and left to go to work for a company called Signature Consultants. All right, which is headquartered out of Fort Lauderdale. Um, and then about 4 years, maybe 5 years after that, Dices acquired Signature Consultants. So I kind of wound up going full circle back with the same organization, and now it's Dexia. Um, if I could write a script for my life, I would have never in a million years written that script.
Yeah.
Um, but it is probably one of the best. Sometimes I'm not even sure sometimes that I made the conscious decisions other than I allowed God to kind of direct me in certain ways and listened for a change. And and couldn't be happier. Couldn't be happier in how this all worked out.
Love it. Well,
So
I think just like the story of you and your wife, I mean, things you happen for a reason. It kind of like if you surrender to that moment and like what's going to happen. And when I first heard, okay, MIS-togram, I'm like, wow, that's a secret weapon because now when you're out doing discovery with customers, you have a little bit of technical background. You probably can ask questions that most average seller might not be able to think about, or
sure.
you know, are you a
You know,
Caddyshack fan by chance?
I'm sorry.
Are you a Caddyshack fan by chance?
Oh yeah.
So when you all I saw was Ty Webb being your boss when he said your code is not it's not good. Stinks.
Yeah. Yeah. He did not. Listen this way. He did not leave. There was no ambiguity in his evaluation there. So
Well, my code would stink too, Larry. If we got that, we got that in common.
the crazy thing is, it was in hindsight. Once I kind of got over the shock of that, it was a massive relief because I did not. I mean, I envisioned that was going to be my future. And yet, for that entire internship, I was miserable because I was sitting in this little cubicle just crunching out code. And yeah, it was probably some of the best advice I've ever gotten.
Well, shout out to your leader for being honest.
I know exactly.
You know,
And again, if I could go back and find the guy and thank him, I absolutely would.
I mean, that's the same thing tied back to fatherhood. I mean, as dads, we can either protect our kids and lie to them or tell them the truth sometimes. And it might be awkward, it might be uncomfortable, but like that's where growth happens is when we get a little uncomfortable. And I mean, I see it in the work I'm doing now, which I did not plan on doing, but whether it's leadership work or coaching or working with sales teams, like I see so many leaders not being afraid to tell a salesperson, "Hey, that's that out for you. Like you've been here for X amount of years and you haven't closed one deal. Why? Like in my mind, why the hell are they still here?
Exactly.
Let them go do something else. But like it's not, doesn't make sense.
Well, it's kind of like the same, I'll go back to, because we've used it a lot internally, that friends don't let friends drive drunk. It's the same thing. If you see somebody, if you care about them, which I think all good leaders should care about their people, is if you truly care about them, you owe it to them to be honest. All right. And I think it's that balance, the difference between being nice and being kind. Okay. Is you can be nice all day long and make them feel good about themselves, or you can be kind and help them with sometimes hard truth.
Yep.
If it helps point them in the right direction or helps them along their
Yep.
path. So, and I think that's what I see more often than not with young leaders is they struggle with that part of it of sharing that information, even though they know this is the best thing for them.
They want to be liked.
Exactly. Except it's uncomfortable because nobody likes
Yep.
to hear stuff like that. I didn't like hearing that my code sucked, but in hindsight, like I said, best advice I've probably ever gotten. So
Right. Right. Well, as we get ready to wrap up here, people have, if they've never heard of Dexian
Mhm.
and they're intrigued to like, obviously that's the combination of signature and dices together. But like, if people have never heard of Dexian, tell us what does Dexian do? How can we learn more about this great organization? And how can people learn more about you?
Oh, terrific! Thank you. It is. It's a Dexian is a combination of a handful of companies that have really been pulled together. The two of which, like I said, were Dices and our digital intelligence systems and Signature Consultants. What's been interesting with that merger when we did that, and we call it a merger because it really was an acquisition, but the way the two organizations blended felt more like a merger. And oddly enough, when we came together, there wasn't a lot of overlap. When you got two organizations that are of the size that we were in the staffing industry, to not have duplication is really rare. Okay. And so what it did is it created an organization that combined both this really efficient, um, large volume staffing operation with some offshore and nearshore opportunities and resources to deliver talent with this other organization that was very much a white glove relationship based high touch environment and really kind of blended the two together. Um, what what we've done as a result of that is kind of take our training and development model out of one and make it the core of who we are. We hire a lot of folks right out of school, put them through a really impressive, actually an award-winning training program. We're one of I believe we're the only staffing firm that's ever been nationally recognized repeatedly for our training program. And as a result, I think it's that same thing. You see the results and you see the surveys of best places to work. I think that plays a large part in why we continue to be ranked as one of the best places to work in the staffing industry. And the idea is basically to take people from school that have the aptitude and have the attitude as much as anything, teach them our business and teach them how to be salespeople, and then carry that even further on, teach them how to be leaders. I think that's probably been one of the bigger gaps that I've seen in my career is we tend to train people and teach people how to do a specific skill set. We don't focus as much on teaching people how to be good leaders. And that's something that we started a couple of years ago, really, really focusing on. So, as an organization, that's kind of our mindset and our philosophies, if you will. What we do, though, is we do traditional staff augmentation, contingent workforce staffing. We do managed service projects. We do complete ERP division that focuses on providing talent and solutions for that, as well as huge presence globally. We are the second largest minority owned staffing firm in the world. Um, I said world. I'm gonna it's either don't hold me to the world part, but I know we are number two.
Sounds better.
It does sound better, and I'll probably be checked by our legal team on that one. But it's a pretty amazing organization. Like I said, having spent a good bit of time in the staffing industry and in other industries, what we're creating, and I say it that way, not what we've created, but what we're creating, I think is changing a lot of how companies look at that flexible workforce, if you will.
So cool. And if people want to learn more about you, I get is LinkedIn the best way
LinkedIn.
to
Yep.
okay.
Yep. Larry Thompson.
The
I
one and
don't think
only.
there's anything. You know what's funny, because I don't actually pay attention to my LinkedIn very often, so I don't even know what my. It's there's a lot of Larry Thompsons that tend to pop up. One was a former attorney general. I am not that smart. Um,
Well, you're Larry Thompson, the cowboy, and
there
I
you
think
go.
that's
That's how. You know what? Honestly, Casey, now you said that, I might need to update my LinkedIn profile to have that in there. So
the cowboy of staffing.
there you go.
We'll rope and ride and find your talent. We'll lasso them.
There
There you
you
go. No,
go.
I'm
That's
just.
it. I
That's my
like
dad.
that.
My dad jokes are coming out. Okay. Well, it's now time to go into the lightning round, where I ask you just random things. I say random things. I'm going to show you the negative hits of taking too many hits in college, not bong hits, but football hits.
Okay.
And it's your job to answer them quickly. It's my job to get a giggle out of you.
Okay.
Are you ready?
I think so.
Okay. True or false? Your first day ever working with Mark Nussbaum, you both rode a horse together to work.
False.
Okay. True or false? You once
Sorry,
met.
that was a giggle because I'm picturing Nussbaum on a horse. Go up. Sorry.
True or false? If Mark Nussbaum would ride a horse, he would go bareback.
Oh, true. Absolutely.
True. Love it. Okay. True or false? I've ridden a horse on a beach in Cabo with a cowboy hat and no shirt.
True.
That is true.
I can
Um,
see that. Yep.
what is? I learned the word vamonos. Vamonos.
There you go.
That is a true story and one I don't know why I just shared.
I'm glad you did, though.
Thank you. First, actually, tell me your favorite comedy movie ever seen?
Young Frankenstein.
Okay. Wow. We've never had Young Franks on the podcast. Well played. Tell me the last book you read.
um, honestly, this is going to sound very boring. It was, and it was about the Dust Bowl. Um, and oh, shoot, the name of it is completely escaping me. It was a fascinating book about the Dust Bowl and how it impacted, how that came about in the Midwest. And there might have been a Brad Thor book in there in between too. So
All right. Hey, everybody's got their literature of choice. If I went into your phone and look at your music you like to listen to, tell me what would be the one genre or song that would shock your daughter.
that would shock my daughter. Oh man, that's the thing. I raised her on classic rock and roll and so forth. She knows I'm also a jazz fan. Um, Probably Motown.
Okay.
Big Motown fan.
Al Green.
Oh God, yeah.
So
Al
my
Green, the Spinners, Four Tops, Temptations. Yeah.
so good. So my pops, rest in peace. He was a huge Al Green fan. And when he was right before he took his last breath, I remember that someone in the hospice, they said, sometimes when people are getting ready to pass, play music. They like to, and I remember I went straight to Al Green and I was like, man, Al Green's got some cuts. I didn't realize how, like, I had heard I had Al Green Essentials on my whatever phone. And there was like so many good songs. I'm like, that Al
Oh,
Green plays that one.
Al
He's
Green's
legit.
phenomenal.
Yeah.
That's the great thing, and not to go off, but basically, to me, that genre of music was so perfectly produced without all the electronic stuff with it. It was just the timing, everything was just beautiful in that stuff.
Love it. Okay. If there was to be a book written about your life, tell me the title.
um, um, that's a tough one, Casey. I'm coming up with a couple of things. I would say never say never.
Okay, there we go. Now, never say never. It's every person in the staffing industry, every person that ever got an MIS degree, every airport, wherever this book is being sold, Larry, it's sold out. And so now once that happened, now Netflix found out about it, Hulu found out about it, and they're fighting to make this movie. And now you've been named the casting director. I need to know who's going to star you in this critically acclaimed hit movie.
Um, Well, I mean, the obvious would be probably Brad Pitt, but I mean, just the similarities are, um, that. Oddly enough, you know what? I'm going to go with Mark Wahlberg.
Marky Wahlberg, a little tough East Coast guy. I like it. I was thinking you
Exactly.
might say Kevin Costner just with the Tombstone,
Well,
but
that is possible. Yeah, that would be a second choice. If Wahlberg couldn't do it, I'd have to go with Kevin Costner. So,
okay. Well, and last question then. Tell me two words that describe your wife.
patient, um, and amazing.
There we go. Lightning round's complete. We both giggled. I think I'll give you the win because I laughed more at my own jokes, which should not count, but they put me in my scoreboard.
Well, it was funny because you were telling me about the horse riding combo, and it was funny. I've got a picture floated around every now and then when you do the little, one thing nobody knows about you. And I like to tell people I came in second in a camel race in the Sahara Desert, which is actually true. What I usually leave out is there were really only two of us, and it was me and the guide, and he beat me on a race back from the pyramids. So
Hey,
anyway,
still silver. You're still on the
so
podium.
what I was missing though on that camel though was my cowboy hat and my cap pistols. That would have been complete.
Well, I think if you had Spurs, you would have brought home the win for sure that day.
That's true. That is true. That is true. So,
Well, I want to thank you for your time. It's been really, really fun getting to know you better. I
my
want to thank
pleasure.
Mark Nussbaum for making today's episode possible. I want to thank every dad who continues to listen. Thank you guys for your support. I want to thank our sponsors for continuing to supporting us. And if you're watching this on YouTube, everybody, thank you for your support there. We are on video now, which is fun. You get to see what this crazy bald guy from Seattle looks like. But dads, just continue to be curious, continue to be vulnerable to realize you don't have everything figured out. And like Larry said, Larry told a story about checking his ego. Like we all got an ego, put it to the side. There's always something we can learn each and every day from not only maybe our wives or our kids or your a friend or family. But this is a blast. Just because I host this podcast, I got a lot to learn too from everybody else, and I want to just continue to thank everybody for your support. But it's been really fun talking today, Larry, and wish you the rest of have a great rest of your week.
Casey, it's my pleasure. Thank you for doing this. I think this is very valuable. So appreciate all you do.
Thanks, man. All right, bye bye.
Bye bye.